I never planned for this to happen. I never imagined that a stolen glance across the office, a smile that lingered too long, or the brush of a hand against mine could set my entire world on fire. She's my boss, confident, untouchable, everything I thought I could never have. Yet somehow, in the quiet corners of our workplace, behind closed doors where no one dares to look, we've been crossing lines that were never meant to be crossed. Every kiss feels dangerous, every touch feels like a secret that could destroy us both. And still, no matter how hard I try, I can't stop. It started so quietly that I almost didn't notice. The first time I really looked at her, it wasn't during some dramatic moment, but on an ordinary Tuesday morning. She walked into the office with her usual confidence, her heels clicking against the tiled floor, her hair pulled back neatly, her shirt tucked in without a wrinkle. She wasn't just my boss, she was the kind of woman who made people stop speaking mid-sentence when she entered the room. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that demanded attention without her even trying. I had worked under her for almost a year, and in that time, I thought I had built a wall around myself. I reminded myself every day that she was out of reach, that she was the kind of woman who lived in a different world, a world of control and authority where people like me were just part of the background. But sometimes, the heart ignores the rules the mind writes down. I remember the first time her eyes caught mine and stayed there a little too long. It was a small meeting with just 3 of us, and while someone else was talking, her gaze shifted toward me. At first, I thought I had something on my face, or maybe my shirt was out of place. But then I realized her eyes weren't moving away. It was like she was looking past my defenses, searching for something I wasn't ready to give away. And in that moment, my chest tightened, because it felt like she saw me, not just the employee sitting quietly in the corner, but the woman behind the work, the woman who carried secrets and dreams no one ever asked about. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself that she was my boss and that people like her didn't look at people like me that way. But ignoring it became impossible when she started finding little excuses to talk to me. She would call me into her office for things she could have easily handled through email. She would linger by my desk when she didn't really have a reason to. And every time she smiled at me, I felt this spark run through my body, like electricity I couldn't switch off. I began to notice the small things about her, the way her perfume lingered in the air after she passed by, the way her laughter carried a softness when she let her guard down, the way her voice lowered when she spoke directly to me, almost as if she was letting me into a version of herself no one else was allowed to see. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself it was just admiration, maybe even just a silly crush. But then came the night everything shifted. We had been working late on a project, just the 2 of us in the office. The city outside was quiet, the usual chaos dimmed into distant sounds, and inside the room, the only light was the soft glow of the desk lamp between us. I remember how she leaned back in her chair, sighing, her eyes tired but still so alive. She looked at me, and for a moment, there was no barrier of titles or positions, just 2 women caught in the same late-night silence. She said my name softly, almost like a secret, and in that moment, the air between us felt heavier. I don't even know what pulled me forward, but when her hand brushed against mine, I didn't move away. My heart was racing so fast that I thought it might burst, but she didn't let go. Instead, her fingers lingered, tracing lightly against my skin, and the look in her eyes told me that I wasn't imagining it. She wanted this too. The first kiss happened so suddenly that I barely had time to think. 1 second we were staring at each other, and the next, her lips were on mine, warm, soft, trembling but certain. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate, it was the kind of kiss that carried unspoken promises, the kind that said, "I've wanted this for longer than I can admit." My body burned with every second, my mind screaming at me about the risks, the rules, the dangers. But my heart drowned out everything else, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive in a way I couldn't explain. When we finally pulled away, breathless and shaken, the room was filled with a silence that was louder than any words. She looked at me like she was just as terrified as I was, and yet there was no regret in her eyes. There was only longing, and something deeper, something that made me realize this wasn't just going to be a one-time mistake. That night, I went home with trembling hands, my lips still tingling from her kiss, my mind a storm of questions. What had we done? What would happen if anyone found out? Could I even go back to the way things were before? Every answer led me back to the same truth: I didn't want to stop. Even though it was dangerous, even though it could cost me everything, I wanted more. And somewhere deep down, I knew she did too. The days after that first kiss were nothing short of chaos inside my heart. On the surface, I tried to carry myself as though nothing had changed, moving through the office with my usual calm, answering emails, finishing reports, and greeting my coworkers with the same practiced smile. But under the surface, every nerve in my body was alive. I couldn't stop replaying the way her lips had felt against mine, the warmth of her touch, the way her eyes had lingered on me with a mixture of fear and desire. Every glance we exchanged now carried a hidden weight, a secret we couldn't allow the world to see. I found myself stealing glances when I thought no one was looking, only to find her already watching me. It was a dangerous game, this unspoken language of subtle smiles and lingering touches, and yet neither of us seemed willing to stop. At first, I thought she would pull away after that night, that she would wake up to the reality of what had happened and put an end to it. After all, she had so much more to lose than I did: her position, her reputation, the control she had built so carefully over her life. But instead of distance, she came closer. She began inviting me into her office for longer conversations, not about work, but about life, about dreams, about the things that made us human beyond the roles we played. She told me about the loneliness that came with leadership, how people looked at her like she was a machine of authority, never stopping to see the woman behind it all. I confessed my own fears of never being enough, of living a life that felt like it belonged to everyone else but me. And somewhere in those stolen conversations, we found comfort in each other. One afternoon, she brushed past me in the hallway, her hand grazing mine for just a second, and it sent a shiver through me that lasted the entire day. It was so small, so quick, that no one else would have noticed, but for me, it was proof that what had happened wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was becoming something real. But with that reality came the fear. Every time I walked into her office, I felt the walls closing in, not because I didn't want to be there, but because I knew the risks we were taking. If anyone caught us, everything could unravel in an instant. Rumors spread fast in places like ours, and once people started whispering, there would be no turning back. The thought of being judged, of being torn apart for something that felt so right, kept me awake at night. And yet, when I closed my eyes, all I could think about was her. I remember one evening when she asked me to stay behind after everyone had left. My heart was pounding before she even spoke, because I knew what she wanted without her saying a word. We sat in her office, the city lights flickering through the windows, and the silence between us was thick with tension. She stood up and walked toward me slowly, her eyes locked on mine, and in that moment, I could see the battle raging inside her. She was torn between the rules she had built her life around and the pull she couldn't resist. When she reached me, she didn't ask for permission, she simply leaned down and kissed me again, deeper this time, more certain, as though she had finally stopped fighting herself. I melted into her arms, every ounce of fear drowned by the intensity of wanting her. That night, we didn't just kiss. We talked for hours, our words tangled with touches, our laughter breaking through the heavy air. She told me she hadn't felt this alive in years, that something about me had broken through walls she had spent a lifetime building. I told her that she terrified me, not because of her power, but because of the way she made me feel things I couldn't control. When I finally left her office, it was past midnight, and the world outside was quiet, but inside me, everything was loud. The sound of her voice, the warmth of her body, the way her hand had lingered at the small of my back as though she didn't want to let me go, it all echoed in my mind. I should have been afraid, I should have been cautious, but all I felt was hunger. The kind of hunger that doesn't fade with time, the kind that grows stronger with every stolen moment. And as I walked away, I knew something with absolute certainty: this wasn't just an affair of stolen kisses anymore. It was becoming something much deeper, something neither of us was ready to admit but both of us were powerless to resist. The third chapter of our secret unfolded in the most dangerous way possible, through routine that began to blur into intimacy. At first, we told ourselves that it was only happening in private moments, in late-night silences when no one was around, when the office was empty and the world felt far away. But soon, the boundaries started to slip. She would brush past me in the hallway and let her hand linger longer than it should. I would bring her coffee and feel her fingers graze mine when she took it, her eyes locking on mine with a heat that spoke volumes. It was reckless, but it was also addictive. Each time we got away with it, it felt like daring the world to catch us, and the thrill of the secrecy made it impossible to stop. But with the thrill came the weight. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering who we were becoming. I had always thought of her as someone unshakable, someone who lived by rules and discipline, but now she was breaking them just as much as I was. And the scariest part wasn't the fear of being caught, it was the way I was falling deeper into her with every passing day. I wasn't just kissing my boss anymore, I was giving her pieces of myself I had never given to anyone. She began to show me a side of her that no one else saw. In meetings, she was fierce and composed, but behind closed doors, she was softer, vulnerable, almost fragile in the way she trusted me with her secrets. She told me about the loneliness of her success, how people admired her but never really knew her. She admitted that she had built her life around control because she had been hurt before, and yet here she was, letting go of that control with me. Listening to her, I realized that what we shared wasn't just physical, it was emotional, raw, and terrifying in its depth. And yet, outside of those stolen hours, we had to pretend nothing existed. That was the hardest part. To walk past her in the hallway and act like I didn't want to touch her. To hear her voice in a meeting and act like it didn't send chills through me. To see her laugh with someone else and pretend I wasn't jealous of the way they got a piece of her, even if it was small. Every day felt like wearing a mask, and that mask grew heavier the more I fell for her. The secrecy began to change me. I found myself daydreaming during work, my mind drifting to the memory of her lips, the sound of her laughter, the softness of her hand on my skin. I would sit at my desk, pretending to type while replaying the nights we spent hidden away in her office. Sometimes I wondered if people could see it in my eyes, if the glow I carried from being near her was too obvious to hide. It terrified me, but it also made me feel alive in a way I had never felt before. Then there was the night when everything nearly slipped. We had been working late again, papers spread across her desk, the office empty except for us. The tension in the room was unbearable, every glance charged with a desire we had been holding back all day. Finally, she pushed the papers aside and pulled me toward her. Our lips met with urgency, and before I knew it, we were tangled together, lost in each other. But then, there was a sound. A door creaking somewhere down the hall. My heart stopped. We froze, our breaths quick, listening for footsteps. After a moment, the silence returned, but the fear lingered. We pulled apart, shaken by how close we had come to being caught. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and longing, and I knew what she was thinking: this was dangerous, too dangerous. But then her hand cupped my face, and she whispered, almost desperately, that she couldn't stop. Hearing her admit it out loud made my chest tighten, because I realized I couldn't stop either. That night, I went home with my body trembling, not just from desire but from the weight of what we were risking. I knew this wasn't sustainable. I knew that secrets like this had a way of coming out, tearing lives apart in the process. And yet, the thought of ending it was unbearable. She had become a part of me, woven into my thoughts, my heart, my every waking moment. The more I tried to remind myself of the danger, the more I longed for her. It was like being caught in a storm you knew could destroy you, but standing still anyway because the rain felt too good to leave behind. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one truth carved itself into my mind: we had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The days that followed carried a heaviness that clung to everything, as though the world itself was warning me about the road I was walking down. The kiss that almost got us caught wasn't just a moment of fear, it was a reminder that we were walking on thin ice, and one wrong move could send everything crashing down. Yet instead of slowing us down, the close call only seemed to pull us closer. It was as if the danger made the fire burn brighter, and every time I tried to convince myself to step back, I found myself running straight into her arms again. My body craved her, but more than that, my heart was starting to depend on her. I couldn't imagine going a single day without hearing her voice soften just for me, without feeling the way her eyes lingered like I was the only person in the world who mattered. What had begun as secret kisses and stolen touches was now becoming something deeper, something that scared me more than being caught ever could. She began to take risks that I never thought she would. During meetings, when the room was full, she would ask me questions just to keep me talking longer than necessary, her voice laced with a subtle warmth that only I could catch. Sometimes she would walk past my desk, leaning down just a little too close under the guise of pointing out a correction, her perfume wrapping around me like a secret no one else could smell. I could feel my coworkers' eyes on me, suspicious glances that made my stomach twist, and yet the thrill of knowing they didn't truly know the truth kept me addicted. It was wrong, I knew it, but when she looked at me with that rare softness, I didn't care. One evening, she invited me out under the pretense of discussing work. It was in a quiet little bar, dimly lit, tucked away from the main streets. The kind of place no one from the office would stumble into by accident. I told myself I shouldn't go, that agreeing meant crossing yet another line we couldn't uncross. But of course, I went. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in the corner with a glass of wine, her expression unreadable until her eyes found mine. The moment I sat across from her, the entire world seemed to fade, leaving only the two of us. We talked about everything but work that night, about music, about our childhoods, about the kind of futures we once imagined for ourselves but had long abandoned. She laughed more than I'd ever heard her laugh before, and it made me realize how rare it was for her to be truly free. Somewhere between the laughter and the confessions, her hand found mine beneath the table, and I didn't pull away. That touch was enough to undo all the walls I had built inside me. Leaving the bar together, the night air was cool, and the streets were almost empty. We walked side by side, our hands brushing occasionally, until she suddenly stopped in the shadow of a quiet alley. Her eyes searched mine, as if asking a question without words, and before I could even think, I leaned in. Our lips met in the dark, a kiss that was both desperate and tender, filled with all the emotions we couldn't express in daylight. In that moment, it didn't matter who she was or what roles we played, it was just two women surrendering to something bigger than themselves. When we pulled apart, she whispered that she didn't know how to stop, that every time she tried to put distance between us, she ended up wanting me more. The vulnerability in her voice shook me to my core, because it mirrored exactly what I felt but hadn't dared to say aloud. That night marked a shift. It wasn't just about secrecy anymore, it was about survival. I started to realize how deeply tangled we had become. I thought about her constantly, my emotions swinging between the thrill of loving her and the dread of what could happen if our secret came out. The more I gave in, the more I lost pieces of myself. I started canceling plans with friends, making excuses to stay late at work, reorganizing my life around the possibility of seeing her. And every time I questioned whether it was worth it, the memory of her smile or the sound of her laughter erased all doubt, but with the closeness came cracks in the facade. People around the office began noticing things, how often she called me into her office, how my face lit up in her presence, how her gaze lingered a little too long when I spoke. The whispers were soft at first, barely audible, but I caught them. A coworker joked one afternoon about how I was the boss's favorite, and though it was said lightly, my chest tightened. They didn't know the truth, but the fact that they noticed anything at all meant we were slipping. I told myself to be careful, to pull back just a little, but the moment I saw her again, all my caution disappeared. One night, sitting on her couch in her apartment, because yes, it had gone that far, she looked at me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. She told me that she hadn't planned on this, that she never imagined falling for someone like me, but now that it had happened, she didn't want to let go. I wanted to answer her with reason, to say all the things about how dangerous this was, but instead, I kissed her. I kissed her with all the desperation and love and fear I had been carrying, because words weren't enough anymore. In that moment, I knew that whatever happened next, I was already too far gone. The secrecy had woven us together like threads of a dangerous web, and every attempt to step back only pulled me closer. I could feel the tension tightening around us, the world creeping closer to uncovering what we were hiding. And yet, in the middle of that danger, I couldn't deny the truth that was clearer than ever before. I wasn't just infatuated, I was falling in love with her. And falling in love with your boss wasn't just reckless, it was a risk that could shatter everything we both had built. Still, as I lay in her arms that night, listening to her heartbeat against mine, I knew I wasn't ready to walk away. Not now, not ever. The fifth chapter of our story began with the slow realization that what we had was no longer just a secret affair. It had started with stolen kisses in dark offices and hushed whispers when no one else was around, but now it had grown into something I could no longer contain within those hidden spaces. Every time I saw her, every time her hand brushed mine or her lips touched me, I felt a piece of myself slipping further into her world, a world I wasn't sure I could ever leave. What scared me most wasn't the secrecy or even the danger of being discovered, it was how much I needed her. She had become more than just my boss, more than just a forbidden lover. She had become the air I breathed, the rhythm of my days, the pulse in my veins. And it terrified me to realize how deeply she owned me without even trying. At the office, we tried to act normal, to wear masks that would shield us from suspicion, but those masks were wearing thin. I caught myself smiling when I shouldn't, staring at her longer than was safe, laughing at things she said even when they weren't meant to be funny. And she was no better. She would glance at me during meetings when she should have been focused elsewhere, her gaze softening in a way it never did with anyone else. People around us started to notice. The jokes about me being her favorite became whispers behind my back, and though no one had concrete evidence, the weight of their suspicion pressed down on me every single day. The office, once a place of routine and order, now felt like a stage where every move was being scrutinized, every look judged, every second dangerous. The pressure didn't stop us. If anything, it pushed us deeper into each other. She began inviting me over to her apartment more often, and those nights became our sanctuary. Behind her locked doors, away from prying eyes, we could finally breathe. We cooked together, we talked about our dreams, and we made love with a desperation that came from knowing how fragile our time together really was. Those nights were the only times I felt free, the only times I didn't feel like I was hiding a part of myself from the world. Yet even in those moments of freedom, a voice in the back of my mind whispered that we were building something on borrowed time. One evening, as we sat curled up on her couch, she confessed that she was scared. Not of being caught, but of losing me. She told me that she had spent so much of her life chasing success and control that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly need someone. And now, needing me terrified her because it meant she was no longer in complete control of her world. I listened to her words, and for the first time, I realized that I wasn't the only one who had fallen too deep. She was just as vulnerable as I was, just as addicted, just as terrified. That confession brought us closer, but it also made the truth clearer. This wasn't something we could just walk away from. We were both trapped, not by circumstance, but by our own hearts. Still, the outside world kept closing in. One night, after we had stayed late at the office again, I was walking to my car when a coworker stopped me. Their tone was casual, but the question wasn't, "Are you and her close?" The way they looked at me told me it wasn't just curiosity, it was suspicion. I laughed it off, made up some excuse about how she was just a mentor, someone I admired professionally. But as I drove home, my hands shook on the steering wheel. The walls were getting thinner, the whispers louder, and sooner or later, someone was going to see what we had been trying so hard to hide. The fear of discovery should have been enough to end it, but instead, it made me cling tighter. That weekend, when she invited me over, I broke down in her arms. I told her how scared I was of losing everything, my job, my reputation, my sanity, and yet how powerless I felt to stop myself from loving her. She held me, her fingers stroking my hair, and whispered that she felt the same. She told me that whatever happened, whatever we had to face, she didn't want to face it without me. Hearing her say that should have comforted me, but it only deepened the ache inside me. Because I knew then that I was already too far gone. I wasn't just in love with her, I was tied to her in a way that couldn't be undone without breaking me completely. That night, as I lay in her bed, listening to her breathing softly beside me, I stared at the ceiling and wondered how long we could keep this going before it all came crashing down. Part of me wanted to run, to free myself before it destroyed us both. But the larger part of me, the part that beat with every thump of my heart, knew I couldn't walk away. Not when she had become everything I had ever wanted but never dared to dream I could have. It was reckless, it was dangerous, it was wrong in 1,000 different ways. And yet, as I turned to look at her sleeping peacefully, her face softened in the moonlight, all I could think was that I would risk everything 1,000 times over just to keep her. Because what we had wasn't just passion, it was love. And love, once it takes root, is the hardest thing in the world to hide. The tension in my life by the time we reached this point was almost unbearable. Each morning I walked into the office with a careful smile plastered across my face, praying no one could see through me, praying my trembling hands wouldn't give me away. Every glance at her sent my heart racing, every accidental brush of her shoulder against mine made my skin burn, and every time she called me into her office, I wondered if today would be the day someone finally noticed. It felt like the walls were closing in, like the secret we carried was pressing against the seams of our lives, ready to explode. But in the middle of all that fear, the only thing that truly scared me was the idea of living without her. She had become a constant in my life, an anchor I didn't even know I needed. The way she looked at me in those quiet moments, the way her voice softened when it was just the two of us, the way she listened when I spoke as though every word mattered, it all made me feel seen in a way I never had before. At work, I was just another employee, another face in a sea of names, but with her, I was important. I was wanted. And that feeling was intoxicating. It kept me coming back even when my rational mind screamed at me to run. It made me ignore the whispers that seemed to grow louder every day, the sideways glances from coworkers who suspected more than they said. One afternoon, she asked me to step into her office under the guise of reviewing a project. My heart pounded as I closed the door behind me, the air between us already thick with unspoken words. She sat at her desk, looking tired, her eyes shadowed with the weight of everything she was carrying. For a long moment, she just stared at me, and I could see the battle waging inside her. Finally, she stood, walked around the desk, and stopped inches away from me. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, her voice shaking. The words cut into me like knives, and for a second, I thought she was ending it. My chest tightened, panic rising in my throat, but before I could respond, she cupped my face in her hands and kissed me. It was desperate, aching, filled with all the longing we had been burying. When she pulled back, her eyes glistened with tears. "We can't keep doing this," she repeated, "but I don't know how to stop." Hearing her confess the same weakness that consumed me was both terrifying and comforting. It meant I wasn't alone, but it also meant neither of us had the strength to end what we had started. That night, I went to her apartment again. The moment the door closed behind me, all the masks we wore in public fell away. We clung to each other like the world was trying to tear us apart, our kisses urgent, our touches desperate, as though we could silence the fear with the press of our bodies. Later, lying tangled in her sheets, we talked in whispers, our faces inches apart. She told me about the pressure she felt, the loneliness of being in charge, how everyone saw her as powerful but no one saw how tired she was, how human. I listened, stroking her hair, and realized that in some ways, she needed me just as much as I needed her. That realization scared me even more, because it meant we weren't just lovers hiding from the world, we were each other's lifelines, but lifelines can also become chains. The more entwined we became, the harder it was to separate my identity from hers. I found myself neglecting parts of my life outside of her. Friends noticed I was more distant, family calls went unanswered, my hobbies collected dust. All of my energy, my attention, my emotions revolved around her. It felt like love, deep and consuming, but it also felt like drowning. Because even as I gave her more of myself, I knew we were living in borrowed time. Secrets like ours didn't stay hidden forever, and the day of reckoning was coming whether we were ready or not. The cracks were already showing. One day, a colleague stopped me in the break room and casually mentioned that I seemed to spend an awful lot of time with her. Their tone was light, almost teasing, but their eyes told a different story. It wasn't just an observation, it was suspicion. I forced a laugh, brushed it off, but inside, I was shaking. I rushed to her office later, panic spilling out of me in words I couldn't control. She listened, her face serious, and then she did something that both soothed and broke me. She held my hands and told me she didn't care what people thought. She said she wasn't ready to give me up, that the risk was worth it. I wanted to believe her, I wanted to wrap myself in her certainty, but part of me couldn't ignore the danger anymore, and yet, despite all the fear, I kept going back. Every night I swore I would pull away, but every morning I found myself drawn to her again, like a moth to a flame I knew would burn me. We were both trapped in a cycle of passion and guilt, longing and fear, unable to let go but terrified of being caught. As I lay in her bed that night, her arms around me, I realized I was caught in a paradox. I had never felt so alive, and yet I had never been so close to losing everything. The truth was becoming impossible to deny. What we shared wasn't just an affair, it was a love story written in the shadows, beautiful and tragic all at once. And deep down, I knew shadows never last forever. Light always finds its way in, and when it did, our secret would no longer be ours alone. The weight of what we had been carrying reached its heaviest in those days. By now, the whispers in the office had shifted into something sharper, more deliberate. I could feel eyes following me when I walked past, could sense the questions hanging in the air, unspoken but dangerously close to being voiced. People had noticed the way she called me into her office more than anyone else, the way her tone softened with me, the way our eyes seemed to lock longer than they should. It was no longer just a game of paranoia in my head, others were beginning to see the truth that we tried so desperately to hide. And yet, instead of pulling away from her, I only fell deeper. It was as though the more dangerous it became, the more I clung to her, as if letting go would break me in ways I couldn't recover from. At night, her apartment became the only place where I could breathe, but even there, the walls felt thinner than before. Every kiss carried a trace of desperation, every embrace was tinged with the fear of being ripped apart. We began talking in circles about what we should do. She would lie beside me, her hand tracing slow lines across my skin, and whisper that maybe we should end it before it destroyed us. But then her lips would find mine, her body pulling me back into her orbit, and suddenly neither of us wanted to stop. I started to notice how torn she was, between the life she had built so carefully, with rules and boundaries she had lived by for years, and this chaotic, all-consuming love that had broken through those walls. Sometimes, I saw it in her eyes, the way she looked at me like she wanted to keep me forever but didn't know how. The fear seeped into my days, into every part of me. I started checking over my shoulder in the hallways, panicking at the sound of footsteps behind me, avoiding conversations with coworkers who might be piecing the truth together. I laughed when I was expected to laugh, but it felt hollow. I worked harder than ever, desperate to prove myself so no one could accuse me of gaining favor through something more personal. Yet no matter how hard I tried to bury it, the truth pulsed inside me every time she so much as looked at me. And then, one afternoon, everything almost collapsed. We were in her office, going over a report, when the tension between us became too much to ignore. She closed the file and leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on me with that familiar heat. The air was thick, pulling us together like a magnet we couldn't resist. She stood up, walked around the desk, and before I could remind her of the risks, her lips were on mine. It was quick, rushed, but it was enough. The door opened seconds later. A colleague stepped inside, holding a folder, and froze when they saw us standing too close, both of us caught off guard. Though we pulled apart instantly, the look in their eyes told me they had seen more than we wanted them to. My stomach dropped, my skin went cold, and I forced a nervous smile while she took the file and dismissed them. The moment the door closed, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. She looked at me with wide eyes, and I saw fear in her face that I had never seen before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the shock on my colleague's face, the way the air had shifted in the office afterward. Though no one said anything outright, I could feel it, the stares, the murmurs, the sense that our secret was no longer safe. I went to her apartment the next evening, desperate for reassurance, desperate to know what she planned to do. She opened the door looking exhausted, her shoulders heavy with the weight of decisions neither of us were ready to make. We sat together in silence for a long time, our hands entwined, the room filled with unspoken words. Finally, she whispered that maybe it was time to tell the truth. My heart skipped, panic flooding through me. The idea of exposing ourselves, of putting everything out in the open, felt like stepping off a cliff. But the alternative, living in constant fear, waiting for the truth to explode without warning, felt just as unbearable. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to beg her to keep hiding, to protect us for just a little longer. Another part of me longed for freedom, for the chance to love her without fear. I looked at her, at the exhaustion in her eyes, and realized how much the secrecy had been hurting her too. She wasn't the invincible boss everyone thought she was human, fragile, and as tangled in this as I was. I told her that I loved her, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It was the first time I had said it out loud, the first time I had put a name to the whirlwind that consumed me. She froze, then pulled me into her arms, whispering the same words back to me with a tremor in her voice. That night, wrapped in her arms, I realized the truth that terrified me most of all. We weren't just risking everything for stolen kisses and secret nights. We were risking everything because we were in love, deeply and irreversibly. And love like ours wasn't something that could stay in the shadows forever. Whether we wanted it or not, the light was coming. And when it did, everything would change. The morning everything changed began like any other, but deep down, I felt the shift before it even happened. The office was buzzing with the usual rhythm of keyboards and phones ringing, but underneath that ordinary noise, there was a different kind of tension. Whispers spread faster than usual, eyes lingered longer, and I could feel the weight of conversations that stopped the second I entered the room. My stomach twisted as I sat at my desk, trying to drown myself in work, but I couldn't ignore the way the air seemed to hum with something unspoken. By midday, I knew without a doubt that our secret had slipped beyond our control. It was later that afternoon when the storm broke. We were called into a meeting with senior staff, a meeting that hadn't been on the schedule. My pulse hammered as I walked into the room, every step heavier than the last. She was already there, composed as always, but I could see it in her eyes, the flicker of fear she tried so hard to hide. The discussion began with talk of professionalism, boundaries, and the importance of workplace conduct. Then the questions came. Not direct, not accusatory, but laced with implication. Were there conflicts of interest? Had our relationship crossed lines? The room was suffocating, every word laced with judgment, every glance a dagger. I wanted to speak, to defend us, but my throat closed, and I couldn't force the words out. She stepped in, her voice steady, her tone calm, but I could feel the strain behind it. She didn't admit anything, not directly, but she didn't deny it either. And in that silence, in that hesitation, the truth was written for everyone to see. When the meeting ended, I could barely breathe. I rushed out before anyone could stop me, my chest tight, my hands shaking. Minutes later, she found me in the stairwell, her own mask cracking for the first time. She pulled me into her arms, holding me like she was afraid I might disappear, and for a moment, the fear melted under the weight of her embrace. "It's out now," she whispered against my hair, her voice breaking. "We can't keep hiding anymore." The words should have crushed me, but instead, I felt an odd sense of relief. For the first time, there were no lies between us and the world. For the first time, the secret wasn't just ours to carry. The days that followed were brutal. The gossip in the office turned from whispers to open speculation. Some looked at me with pity, others with judgment, and a few with outright hostility. People whispered about favoritism, about unprofessional behavior, about how reckless we had been. My reputation felt like it was being torn apart piece by piece, and every time I heard my name spoken in hushed tones, shame wrapped itself tighter around me. But through it all, she stood beside me. She didn't let me carry the burden alone. She called out the gossip when it reached her ears, she held her ground when questioned, and she made it clear that what we had was real. That strength gave me something to hold on to, even as the world seemed determined to break us apart. One evening, after another exhausting day of sidelong glances and cold shoulders, we sat in her apartment in silence. The weight of it all pressed down on us, heavier than ever before. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes raw with emotion, and asked if I regretted it, if I wished we had never crossed that line. I looked at her, at the woman who had become my world, and despite the fear, the shame, the chaos, my answer was clear. No. I didn't regret it. Because what we had wasn't just scandal or desire. It was love, real and fierce, the kind that changes everything. The kind worth fighting for. Tears filled her eyes as she kissed me, and in that moment, I knew we had made our choice. We would stand together, no matter what came next. In the weeks that followed, the noise around us began to dull. Some people accepted it, some never did, but life moved forward anyway. The stares grew fewer, the whispers quieter, and eventually, the chaos settled into something almost normal. It wasn't easy, we had to rebuild trust, prove ourselves again, and live with the scars of judgment, but we did it together. And slowly, I began to realize that what we had built in the shadows was strong enough to survive the light. Looking back, I sometimes wondered if we had been reckless, if we could have chosen a safer path. But then I would see her smile, hear her laughter, feel her hand in mine, and I knew the truth. Love doesn't always arrive when it's convenient. It doesn't always follow the rules or wait for permission. Sometimes it crashes into your life when you least expect it, messy and dangerous, and demands that you choose. And we chose each other. We chose love, even when it meant risking everything. And in the end, that choice made all the fear, all the whispers, all the judgment worth it. Because I wasn't just secretly making out with my boss anymore, I was standing beside the woman I loved, unapologetically, and for the first time I felt free.